Yes, ma'am.
So a very good evening to all the participants who have joined us for this faculty development program. I welcome each one of you to the third day of the faculty development program on the topic Recent Trends in Commerce and Industry, jointly organized by St.Ann's College for Women and St. Pius X Degree and PG College for Women. In a special way, I welcome the resource person for today's session, Mr. Vijay Kumar, a CSR professional. So we welcome you in our midst and thank you for gracing us with your presence and for giving your expertise on the topic, tackling climate crisis, challenges and solutions, and ethical investing. So a very warm welcome to you, sir. And we request you to accept our floral greetings. So before I hand over the session to Mr. Vijay Kumar, I would like to present a brief profile of sir to all of you. Mr. Vijay Kumar is a sustainability and multidisciplinary professional with over 10 years of experience. Sir has worked extensively in the areas of environment, climate change, corporate sustainability, social entrepreneurship and incubation, and corporate social responsibility. Sir's current role as CQC, he leads the development of new concepts and solutions for climate change and sustainable development programs, and he engages in projects across South Asia and Africa. Earlier, Mr. Vijay Kumar has worked at BVIC, where he was a member of the strategic management team and was instrumental in establishing the Center for Social and Responsible Business. Sir has conceptualized and developed high-impact development program for the US Consulate, Canada Fund for Local Initiatives, and Sir is also contributed to various national level events, seminars, training programs, and webinars, and he also was a panelist for the various panel discussions. Sir was advisor to the various engineering colleges, management institutes, and startups, and he has mentored young entrepreneurs and professionals. Mr. Vijay Kumar is a certified auditor for the UN Climate Program and is a lead auditor in quality, environment, carbon, and sustainable management standards. Sir was also engaged in advisory projects for the World Bank, ADB, European Union, US Consulate, and Canada International Development Agencies. He has led research programs and has contributed to publications, newsletters, and knowledge sharing modules. In the past, he worked with the TUV, NORD, and Cenis, IT Power for UK, and Zenith Energy. He has delivered over 250 consulting and auditing assignments in his stint. So far, Sir has trained over 300 international participants and more than 3,000 national participants on various subjects. Mr. Vijay Kumar has been recognized as a young leader for social change by the US Consulate General, Hyderabad. He has completed his master's in environmental science from Usmani University, postgraduate diploma in energy management from the Central University of Hyderabad, and a master's in social work. Sir, we are honored with your presence with us with such a huge profile that you have. So thank you for being the resource person for today's session, and I request you to take over.
Thank you, Ms. Pavitra, for such wonderful introduction. I'm really honored to be here, training the faculty today on the topic of climate change. First of all, let me congratulate and appreciate, the colleges, both the colleges, for designing such a wonderful program. And all of us know that climate change has been in talks in the recent past. has been a topic of controversies and conflicts among the nations. And so I'm fortunate to be working in the field over more than 10 years. So I'm happy to share the knowledge with you today. I think, do you have the right to share my PPT?
Yes, sir. You will be
Yes, sir.
able to share.
Okay. Right. So you all able to see the presentation?
Yes, sir. We are able to see.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm having some issues with Wi-Fi. Sorry about that. So if there is any interruption, so I'll join back in a minute. And also, if there is any issue with mic or anything, please let me know. So I'll check on that. And I would encourage the participants, to post the questions if uh, want any clarifications. Maybe we'll take it at the end, but still, so as you get something in the mind, so please post it in the Q&A or chat. So I'd love to, have more a detailed Q&A and discuss more than me speaking throughout. Of course, I'll do most of the session, but still, I would like to interact more with you. So let's look at where we are. So I would like to start off my presentation with this, image, which is where we call, home. And so though we have plans to colonize Mars and Moon probably sometime soon, but so this is something which we have at present. And so if humanity has to survive, all the life has to survive for coming generations, or maybe for next 1,000 or 1 lakh years. So we need to make sure that our home is safe and sustainable. And so it's a very famous quote. I think most of there is no planet B for us. At least as of now, there is no habitable planet for humans or anything we call life on Earth. So we need to make sure that this is this is sustainable and habitual. It can be habitated with life for very long, and it is in our hands. So that is something very important that we need to keep in mind. So what is climate change? We'll start with what is climate change, but at the same time, let me give you a glimpse of what we are going to learn today. So I'd like to talk about fundamentals of climate change. So people know here and there what is climate change, but I want to take you through a systematic and scientific perspective. At the same time, what is causing climate change, and what are the effects? Why do we need to bother about climate change? And what are the solutions that we have? And what are the challenges we have in our path? And what is the global level action that is happening, that has been happening in climate change area? And at the same time, what India is doing towards the climate change? And towards the end, we'll talk about the roles. So our roles, what we can do as individuals, society, and as countries to combat the climate change. So this is how the overall objective and purpose of the session is, at least according to me. And we will also discuss briefly about climate finance, climate investments, and there is something called carbon markets, which probably you would be interested to know a little more, where our company Sequest Capital is primarily working on. So let me start with climate change. I assume most of you are not from core science background, so it's very important to distinguish between general usage words with climate change as a scientific reference. So people casually use the weather and climate. So the climate today is not good. Climate is changing pretty fast. So all these words are casually referred. But when it comes to a clear scientific way of telling it, so what we see on day to day is weather. I think most of you might be aware. But whereas climate is something which is a long term phenomena. So that is something fundamental to the understanding of climate change. So climate won't change just like in a day or two. So it takes decades to millions of years for some change to happen, some changes to happen to climate. So when we talk about climate change as a phenomenon, so we are looking at averages of decades or averages of millions of years or lakhs of years. So that is something we need to keep in mind. So it's still okay. We can still call it in a casual reference on day-to-day basis, whatever we want. But when we talk about climate change as a subject, so we need to keep this in mind. So the first thing we need to understand when we say that climate is changing, so what is causing the climate change? And I know, I'm sure, like most of you are quite aware of what is happening here. It's primarily is the pollution that we see from the emissions that are coming from the stacks. So there are different ways of looking at it. If we see pollution, we refer in general is a localized concept of phenomena. But when the pollution across the world, in a certain components of the pollution are leading to change in the global phenomena. So that is where, that is what we are talking about as emissions. So the local pollution, which is air emissions or water pollution, all of that we talk about, like we are only affected like next, vicinity or within 5 kilometers or 10 kilometers or maybe 100 kilometers. But whereas we are talking about when it comes to climate change, we talk about emissions, so which has impact at global level. Everyone across the globe, everything living on the earth is directly or indirectly affected. So where it all started is something very interesting to know. This is a kind of a story, that we need to keep in mind. All of us know from the history that rapid industrialization that happened in 80s, late 80s, 1800s. So that is when it all started, where we started using coal, fossil fuels, which helped us power the engines, steam engines. So that is where it all started. We started using the mechanized equipment, for our industries, and the growth has been rapid. And if some of you remember, in historical times, the emissions in the background. So that is how the situation was. Hello, I'm sorry. I think I'm disconnected, right?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry. So I'm just sharing again. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So where were we? So I don't know when we were disconnected. There was a call. Okay. So that is when it all started, when the industrialization started happening and we started consuming more energy. We started burning more of the fossil fuels and leading to the pollution. So this is where it all started, and where we see the different kind of gases that are leading to the climate change impacts. So which primarily are the carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, perfluorocarbons, hexafluorocarbons, and SF6, sulfur hexafluoride. So you don't have to keep these things in mind, but these are the six main gases that are reason that are the culprits in climate change. So all these are primarily coming from fossil fuel burning. So all the coal, oil, everything that we look at. So over a period of time, what happened as our industries, the production has gone up and there are population explosion. More and more people started consuming things which are from the factories and industries. So the need for production has increased, and as a result, this went beyond control. And while this is happening, the industrialization is happening, there's also on the other hand, so there's a lot of deforestation, agriculture, clearing the land for agriculture, changing the land use, increase in meat consumption, which also needed a lot of livestock, growth. At the same time, the technology advancements in transport also led to a lot of usage of fossil fuels for our transport. And there's change in the land use, the way we are urbanizing, and we have the kind of metro cities that we have today. So everything added to this kind of effect, cumulative effect. So the trend in emissions started getting alarming in late 1960s. So that is when people started thinking there is something changing, which is fundamentally altering the way we used to look at our atmosphere and Earth. The CO2, the carbon dioxide. So we measure this in ppm, which is parts per million. So which was at 280 in 1800s, has gone up to 415 ppm today. So which is 50% more than what it used to be. And while this number just looks small, but we need to understand, just to change a few ppm, we need to pump billions of tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So imagine, the kind of change from 280 to 415 is gigantic. It's not something very easy to change. If we look at the kind of emissions, annual carbon dioxide emissions from 1750 to 2021, you can see how exponential the emissions growth was now post we started industrializing ourselves. And especially post 1950, the growth has been, of course, too exponential. And we can see on the top, there's a dip, which is a reminder of our COVID that we faced in 2020. The emissions have gone down because there's a lot of curbs on the travel and consumption. But we are again back. We are almost back to normal. So the emissions are going up again. So there are different type of graphs, infographics I'm going to show. Each will give you a different kind of perspective of how we look at things when it comes to climate change. Because it's not just about emissions, though it is fundamental that we need to understand what are emissions and how they are affecting us. But there are different layers of information that we need to absorb before we get to a better understanding of this topic. So this is how the trend was. If you look at the ppm, how it has gone from to 278 pre-industrial to 417 as on date. So it's more or less, it keeps changing between 415 to 417 depending on year to year. So if you see that extra red line that you see towards the right of the graph is very exponential. Here the rapid industrialization has led to this extreme increase. So this particular record was done in Mauna Loa in Hawaii Islands, where so it's an observatory where they record the carbon dioxide levels at different points each year. This is another graph which indicates the emissions by World's region. So if we look at how it has been, like overall emissions have been growing up, but there's also different layers. If we look at Europe, European Union, even for that matter, United States, the emissions have stabilized and started going down. Even for that matter, in South America, Africa, even India, recently we started, adding a lot of renewable energy into our grid, into our power supply. So it's going either stabilizing or going down. But whereas in China, it has been exponential and it has been continuously going up, except for the COVID period. If you see, there's a little dip in the emissions, but which has been contributing a lot in the recent past. And at the same time, Asia, excluding China and India, so which are again aspirational countries, which started growing a lot in terms of industries and consumptions. So their emissions are going, very high, exponential. So the emissions are not absolutely going up every year for every country or every region. So there has been a change, systematic change. So this is how, if we look at today, how if we divide the 100% of share between different countries. So this is how it will look at it. So it's little few years old, but more or there is I don't think there will be substantial changes even today. So China, which is a major contributor, which is at 27.2%, then comes United States 14.6. Then we have India, which is at 6.8%, and we have Russia, Japan, which are contributing. If you look at all the small countries, rest of the world, it's just 15%, which is just equivalent to United States, whereas China is almost double. So India is not far behind. So this is how, if you look at absolute emissions at this point in time, more or less, this is where we are. But if I change and add the historical emissions, from the time 1800 onwards, how the situation has been. So the graph changes. So the information and the results changes. If you see United States is on the top with 27.6% if I add all their historical emissions, because they have industrialized so much, they have become a developed country, advanced country, and then they started stabilizing their energy consumption and emissions. So that is why it's going down. Whereas for the rest of the countries, though they started emitting very high in the recent past, especially for China and India, if you add their historical emissions, it is still not as high as European Union or United States. So this is very important to keep in mind. So it is not about absolute emissions that we are emitting today. It's also about what you have done. So how much you have made it in the past. Because we are all looking at a common resource when it comes to atmosphere or pollution. So it is not just your country alone when it comes to climate change. Whereas the local pollution is only affecting the people here. But hello, am I connected?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay. So it is very important to keep that in mind in terms of historical emissions. So that is where the conflicts are all about when it comes to international negotiations. We will talk about it in the further slides. It is little old till 2014, so we don't have this kind of graphs in the recent past, but yet, so this gives us a clear picture of how the historical emissions have been leading to what kind of shares for each country. And if you look at from another dimension by sector, so which sector is contributing to most of the greenhouse gas emissions? So energy, which contributes to majority, it's almost 3/4 of our emissions are coming from just energy. And so as we know, energy again, there are three divisions. If you look at the first one is energy used in industries, factories. So that is where we all get our goods and products from. So which is taking a major share of 24%. And then we have transportation, all the road, rail, passenger vehicles, airplanes, everything together is 16.2. And energy used in buildings, which is about all the residential, commercial building, everything together. So energy is the primary source of greenhouse gas emissions. So that we need to keep in our mind. And that is where our major intervention should be. At the same time, we also have agriculture, forestry, and land use. So majorly it is, talking about deforestation, agriculture, rice cultivation, livestock, and manure. So these are waste management. All these things come into this portion, which is again a major chunk, which is 18.4%. Other than that, we have minor shares of waste, which is a direct landfills emissions, which is not extraordinary, but still a decent amount to look at. The same time with industries. So this is how our emission map is when we look at from the sector-wise perspective, which sector is contributing to what kind of emissions. So let me add to whatever we have seen before, the population dimension. So if you see the population growth and the emissions growth, both are going correlation, and that clearly indicates like population explosion and the emissions are going hand in hand, and it's a direct relation between these two. So let's look at this map. Just keep that in mind. In further slides, we'll just connect how each one is leading to the effects and impacts, and who is doing what and who is adversely impacted and positively impacted. So if you just look at them as bubbles, so we can see earlier maps and infographics also indicated that China big bubble and US is a big bubble. Similarly, India, Japan, Europe. So all these countries are major players in terms of emissions. But if you look at this particular map, CO2 emission map per capita, everything changes. In the earlier one, we have US, though it's the biggest emitter, but it's still less than China. But when I look at this map, where we connect this with per capita, US is extremely high. Same with Europe, same with Russia and Australia. Whereas when we look at the absolute emissions, China was the highest, and then US and India. So when we look at African countries, you can see almost they are at less than 0.1 tons of emissions per capita, or even 0.2 or 0.5, most of them. India is somewhere about 1 ton equivalent of per capita emissions. So this is a main confronting point, controversy that always the developed countries and developing countries have been fighting with, because so there is a fundamental difference in the way we look at absolute emissions versus per capita emissions, because now the population in US versus population in India or China, if you compare, so they are only 1/4 of what we are, as a country's population. But their emissions are almost equal to us, and compared to India, it's almost double. So what it indicates is there is a not so justifiable way of consuming the resources that are available on Earth, because someone is consuming almost 3 times, 4 times of what an Indian or African, or for that matter any other South Asian, is consuming in terms of energy. So while we can't stop them from consuming what they're consuming, but it's important to note that their consumption is impacting everyone else living on the earth. So this is one of the biggest confronting points between the developed countries and the developing and underdeveloped countries when it comes to climate change talks and negotiations. And keeping that in mind, if you see who is impacted most, which is a climate risk map, what we are looking at is a climate risk map. The one who is emitting the least, if you just look at the African countries in the previous one and this one. So Africa is almost close to nil, 0.1 to 0.2 tons per capita emissions. Whereas when it comes to climate risk, they are at most at risk, extremely risky. Whereas the highest emitters, which are United States, Russia, even China for that matter, so they are at almost close to least risk, and United States is at least risk. So this is what we call is a kind of climate injustice. The one who is actually causing this problem is not at highest risk, and this is unfair, on especially on countries which like Africa, which are underdeveloped, and we are struggling with day-to-day needs like food, water, electricity, energy, everything else. So they will be affected the most because of the climate change. Whereas the developed countries, even developing countries, emerging countries, so they are relatively better positioned. In fact, the advanced countries are much better positioned than these guys to combat the climate change effects and make their populations, make their resources safer, shield from the climate impacts. So this is the biggest issue. This is the biggest problem when it comes to climate change. The one who is not causing it is affected the most, because it's the same earth that we are living in. and so we can't stop them getting affected by the climate change, though they are not causing it. So let's look at the effects of climate change. So far we have seen, what is causing it, and we understood different perspectives of, what are the kind of emissions from, different historical perspectives, different country-wise emissions, region-wise emissions, per capita emissions, and population connections. So now, what all of them are leading to, is this. So this is what we are primarily worried about: the carbon dioxide increase, ppm increase is leading to a rising in global temperature. So the rising global temperatures are the main cause. There are many effects, but this is fundamentally changing most of them things that we know, things that we live with. If you look at the last 80 years, historically have been the warmest on the record, and you see the records from 1900, even before. Most of the times in, if you see before 1930s, the average mean temperature was less than the previous historical past. But whereas from 1940 onwards, so we have seen few years warm, few years cold. But from 1980s onwards, so there is no going back. We have been having the warmest years every year. Every year has been breaking the records, and last 8 years have been the warmest. I think we all have been feeling it. It's not that just it's on the graphs and records, but we have also been witnessing in our own cities where we are living, that what kind of summers we are looking at. And I think last to last year, in fact, the records broke in UK and some of the European countries. Some of them hit 40 degrees, which was first for them the past 1 to 2 centuries. So this is happening for real. So it is not just the records that they are talking, but it is something we are actually feeling the heat of what's happening, the temperature rise. So we are at 2022. So the average temperature is increased by 0.86. So this is something we need to really worry, because 0.86 looks like less than 1 degree, not a big deal. But sorry. Sorry, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Oh, there's someone is talking, so I was okay. So 0.86, we can just change the AC temperature by 10 degrees, 15 degrees, just with the remote. But whereas for global climate to change even 0.1 degree, it takes decades. Okay, it takes millions of years to change even 1 degree. Whereas we, with our actions in the past 20, 30 years, the kind of emissions we are pumping into the atmosphere, we already have changed close to 1 degree, which is phenomenal, which is not something very simple to achieve. So it's not a positive achievement, but which is something altering the entire Earth, something we need to be concerned about. And what happens with minute change in the temperature, so is something we need to understand. So there have been a lot of researches that have happened across the globe, primarily by IPCC, which is Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, which has been doing research on what kind of changes that are happening, what are we predicting that are going to happen in the next few years and few decades. So something we'll see in the coming slides. So why the temperature is rising, something we need to understand. So this is fundamental. I think some of you would have heard these words: greenhouse effect, global warming. Global warming, I'm sure most of you would have heard about. We need to understand what's happening, why global warming, why greenhouse effect, how they actually happen. And if you see the solar radiation, so the primary source of energy for us, for Earth, for everything on the Earth is sun. So we get sun rays, solar radiation we call it. So some of it gets onto the earth and its surface, some of it gets reflected back, and some of them is used by the absorbed by the ocean, some of them by the plants. So this is how it is a natural cycle that has been happening. So there is no change. Some amount of it gets re-radiated and keeps the earth warm the way it is. So this is a natural phenomena that has been happening for millions of years, and so nothing altered, till we hit the roadblock of climate change that is happening now. So this is what the change that has happened, which is causing the global warming. So in the natural greenhouse effect, which is healthy for us, which is good for us, which is keeping our earth from freezing to ice ball, which is fundamentally very much needed for us to live the way we are. But on the other side, when I mentioned about the emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions that we are pumping into the atmosphere, which are into billions of tons over the past decades, so they are forming a blanket of these gases in the atmosphere. And the primary property of all these greenhouse gases is that it traps heat. So that is the problem. So once these gases are in the atmosphere in higher concentrations, whatever the solar radiation that's coming inside the Earth's atmosphere, it's not going back. It's not going back into the space. It's trapping the irradiated heat within the Earth's atmosphere, and that is how we are like. It is like we are inventors, how we save ourselves from the cold with blanket. So the same way, the blanket of gases around the Earth is making it warm and warm day by day. I think that is how it's called greenhouse effect. If some of the greenhouse, which are like poly houses that are primarily used for nurseries and some sensitive plants, where they trap the heat from not going into the atmosphere, and so that the atmosphere inside that poly house is warm. So the same thing is happening for the entire Earth. So that is how it's called greenhouse effect. So the greenhouse, which is used in horticulture, agriculture, the same kind of effect is happening for the entire Earth, and as a result, it's warming up. And the reason for it is the greenhouse gases that we talked about. And this is what is causing the problem, and this is what is heating up the entire globe. And as a result, what Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, which is IPCC, is predicting that by end of the 21st century, we are going to have increase in the global temperature anywhere between 1.4 degrees to 5.8 degrees. Anything which is going beyond 2 degrees centigrade is going to cause catastrophic effects on the Earth and on the life on the Earth. And we are already, if you look at in 2022 from the previous chart, so we have seen we are already at 0.86, close to 1 degree, and we are not far from 1.5. So the recent predictions, recent extrapolations, expectations, indicate that by 2100, so we will not be in less than 1.5 degrees increase in the temperature, unless we cut our emissions to the extreme extent. So which they say is not impossible, but is extremely difficult. And that is what we are trying to look at. How can we keep the temperature in check so that we can avoid that catastrophic effects. So one of the effects that you possibly would have read in the news, which is very popular, is El Nino and La Nina. So, which are Spanish words named after some of the country stories, but this is something which is affecting the monsoon weather patterns across the globe. So, which has a wide range of impacts on most of the countries. So, El Nino and La Nina are something which affects our cyclones, monsoons, everything for that matter. And so this past 3 years, we are having La Nina in India, and that is how we are having excessive rainfall. And when it comes to El Nino, we'll have drought and less rainfall situations. So before that, if you remember, there were no situations where it was drought situations. Whereas now for the past 2-3 years, we are having, El La Nina effect. So El Nino, La Nina doesn't equal effect everywhere the same way. It doesn't affect everyone the same way. So in some cases it causes drought, some cases it causes excessive floods, rainfalls. So it is not a good phenomenon. So that is something which we need to keep in mind. So if you look at the ice polar regions, how the ice has been melting, which I think most of you would have read about the effects of polar caps been melting, and a lot of news articles. Some of the biggest what you call ice caps have been melting, separated from the main polar regions. So all of them we have been reading in news. So if you look at the maps, the way they have changed over a period of time, 1980s to 2003, so it has further deteriorated in the recent past, and it's also threatening the life of polar regions such as penguins and polar bears, which are high in biodiversity regions. So where exclusive species are at the risk of extinction. And popularly, if you see most of the climate change related, comics, cartoons showcase either penguins or polar bears. So they are at the risk of extinction. And this is from our own country. If you look at Gangotri Glacier, some of the pictures from Himalayas, so how it has affected from 1921, how thick the ice was on the mountains to the river flowing down the icy river, to now what is the situation. It's not even now, it's almost 10 years back, so we don't have the latest pictures though, but this is how it's receding over a period of time because of the global warming. And as a result, it's not easy. It's not just about pictures to manage this, because millions of people are dependent on the Himalayan ice cap, because Ganga river is feeding a lot of agriculture lands throughout its path, and then if Ganga runs dry, it's going to affect millions of people, millions of lives. So we talked about who is causing it. So there is something we need to also discuss here, because there are also alternative theories and people from different thought process. They are saying that climate change is bullshit, global warming is nothing, it's not because of industries, not because of us, it's happening anyway. So all these stories and theories have also been there, which are less popular, but still they are there. And just to understand from long term perspective, from 4 lakh years of data that we look at, global warming, or this increase in temperature, increase in CO2 concentrations, is not the first time that has happened in the Earth's history. So there is a cycle that goes on and off, and there are something called volcanoes. They, when they erupt, there's a lot of emissions that come into the atmosphere, which also leads to increase in the temperature, also leads to increase in the emissions. So if you look at the top graph, even the down one, there has been increase and decrease in the ppm carbon dioxide concentrations over 4 lakh years, but never in the Earth's history it crossed anything beyond 300. And for the first time, because of our own actions, it has gone up to 415. So anyone who is saying that the climate change impact, climate change effect is not because of humans, So this is something which is answering all those controversial questions or theories. So this is happening for sure because of our action, because never in the last 4 lakh or 8 lakh, history, data history that we have for the earth, it never happened. So this is clearly because of our actions, and we hold the responsibility for making sure that everything will be normal. It's not just for humans alone. We are also responsible for millions of species that are living on the earth. I would not show the videos, maybe if we have time at the end, so we'll have a look at them. So the consequences of climate change that we need to understand. So we understood the effect, but what is happening when it comes to our day-to-day lives, when it comes to our economic situations or social situations, how is it going to really impact? So temperature increase, as I mentioned, is going to be one primary effect, which leads to sea level rise by 1 to 4 feet, which is almost more than 1 meter, meaning it may not matter much for some of the countries, but if you look at Maldives, if you look at some of the island countries, and even for that matter, some countries, some cities like Amsterdam, which are below the sea level, so they are going to face a lot of trouble because of the sea level rise, and most of the underprivileged population, poor population, are living close to the sea coast. If you see, fishermen, and a lot of slum areas are also close to seashore. So they are going to get affected the most. And some of the island countries are going to completely wiped off from the uh, Earth's face. And this is something very serious, because we have a new problem called climate refugees. If you should have read somewhere, so people who has to be displaced because their lands are lost, or their country itself might get lost in future. So they have to live somewhere. Somebody has to accommodate them. So it's going to create a lot of problems of someone. It's not just about land alone. The culture and the species, everything else changes, for those people who get affected. So there are unpredictable weather patterns, extreme weather events, which we have been seeing, and it's impacting. It's actually damaging everyone. Not only it's not sparing the developed countries even. So even US has seen extreme weather events in the past 4 or 5 years. Some of the furious cyclones they have faced. Though one key difference that we need to keep in mind is that the kind of damage, the kind of losses, especially the loss of life in developed countries, is much less in number. If I remember correctly, one of the cyclones that impacted Bangladesh has damaged so much, and thousands of people lost their life due to the cyclone. Whereas a cyclone which is even more extreme, severe than what Bangladesh has seen, has only killed about 100 people or less in US. So that is a kind of difference when it comes to the climate preparedness, the impact, the effects that a country faces. So someone who is advanced in terms of technology, well prepared, has enough resources to deal with, so can survive this crisis. Whereas someone who is struggling for their day-to-day bread, uh, are the one who are going to get affected the most, because they'll be caught unaware. Frequent droughts and heat waves is something we have been seeing. Even in India, we are seeing extreme heat in northern parts of India. Even it's affecting southern part as well. But these droughts and heat waves are going to affect the food production. Is also causing a lot of trouble. People working outside, in the sun. It affects our productivity. It also increases other issues when it comes to we have seen that melting ice caps is one thing, which because of more warmer atmosphere. climate. As I mentioned, it increases the hunger, the water crisis, especially in developing countries, because there are drought situation. If there are no monsoons, especially if you look at countries like India, we are highly monsoon dependent because most of our rivers are monsoon fed, excluding Himalayan rivers. And if there are no good monsoons, all our rivers will run dry, and we'll have to fight. Already, the fights have been happening between the states, on the common rivers. Though we have surplus water for the past 3-4 years, but imagine a situation where there is a drought situation, El Nino kind of situation, where we only receive 50% or 80% of normal rainfall. Then it's going to create a lot of conflicts within the country as well. The health risks also going up because more warmer temperature is good for some of the bacteria, viruses, as well as for the insects. So there, in fact, WHO and a lot of research indicate that because of rise in global temperature, there are new diseases that are born, or there are more areas that are being affected, which were earlier not so in the high risk zone, but now they are being affected because of the rise in temperatures. Economic implications, so that we also see next slide how the implications are. Pests and pathogen, as I mentioned, bacteria, pests, and pathogens are becoming more resistant and impacting our agriculture, impacting our food chains. So loss of biodiversity is another thing. So a lot of species, if you look at, I think on average, we are losing a few hundreds to a few thousands of species every year due to loss of biodiversity, which is directly connected to climate change and its impact. And the property loss and loss of land, and also I mentioned about the climate refuges when the countries are directly impacted by it. Ocean acidification due to increased concentrations in CO2 is something which is also a concern because it affects the availability of fish. Also damages the marine life, potential risk for them as well. So we are expecting an economic loss of 1 trillion by year 2040 because of all this climate change and related impacts. So we need to adapt and survive with this crisis, and we'll see how we can do that. As I mentioned, the weather damage grew more in the past year. If you see this particular information from 2001 to 2010, we have lost to the weather related disasters in 1.678 trillions of dollars, whereas in the same 10 years period from 2011 to 20, so it's almost increased by 50%, $2.483 trillion. And so the trend has been increasing, especially in few of the years it has been too extreme, but still on average, if you see it is the average years where the extreme events close to $300 billion of loss are high in the second part compared to the first one. So this is estimated by different agencies based on the kind of losses to property, life, and different elements when they estimate it. So this is something problematic because it's not just about something superficial, because we are seeing it on ground, and we are feeling the heat. Apart from the global issues, right, such as recession and other issues, so we also need the governments have to deal with such kind of losses. So whenever there is a cyclone, so government need to take care of all the population, the food related requirements, and also reconstruct their houses and the entire area. So there's a lot of time, cost, and efforts are involved. So this is all directly linked to the climate change. And one more thing that is directly impact, which is worrisome, is about the percentage of change in GDP per capita. And if you see the African countries and South Asian countries, Southeast Asia as well, are mostly affected. So close to 100% of GDP loss per capita. India and African countries are at extreme, which are at 90% or 90 plus percentage of loss by 2000. Whereas some of the countries are gaining. So if you look at Russia, even for the matter UK, so they are gaining because there are certain benefits that will happen because of melting ice in the polar regions, because Iceland and Greenland are going to open up because they're all fully covered with ice, but now they will have more land available to them. In fact, most of the Russia upper part is snow covered, inhabitable, but because of the warming, those areas will become, good for habitation, human habitation. So that will increase their access to more land, more resources, probably more oil reserves and other minerals. And as a result, there will be increase in their per capita income. But whereas the countries which have most of the population are going to be severely impacted and negatively impacted. So that is something which is worrisome, especially in African continent, where majority of the population is in poverty. So they are going to be affected the most. And as a responsible citizens, we need to do something about this, because this is complete injustice in terms of how things are going on. So we talked about all the challenges, causes, consequences. So now let's look at what we can do, what kind of solutions we have in our hands when it comes to climate change. We divide the solutions of climate change into two categories. The first one is climate change mitigation, and second one is climate change adaptation. So each one has its own clear purpose. The mitigation primarily looks at how we can mitigate these emissions, because we have been talking about emissions throughout. Emissions are the culprit and we need to control them, all of that. So all the actions that are related to the emission related preventions, mitigations or reductions, or new technologies, renewable energy, efficiency improvement, change in the way we use our energy or resources, everything which contributes to the reduction of emissions is called mitigation. So we are mitigating the climate change through reducing the emission. So that is the first concept. And second solution is adaptation. So adaptation is nothing but, we need to take practical actions so that we can manage the risk well. Because so adaptation concept came from the basic understanding, because we have already caused damage. When we talk about that 0.86 degree increase, degree centigrade increase in our temperature, that means there's some damage that has already happened to our climate, and it's going to have its own consequences. So we won't be able to reverse these changes anytime soon, and hence the effects of that change are going to happen. They are going to persist for a few decades to maybe a century. So we need to live with it. One way, so this is a two-pronged approach, where one way we are trying to reduce the emissions that we are causing is one approach, and second one is whatever damage we cause, which is going to come back to us on our face, and we need to deal with it, for which we need to be prepared. So this preparation and making practical actions towards it is adaptation. So when we adapt properly, we call it resilience. So we are resilient enough to deal with climate change crisis. So the climate change adaptation's goal is to make resilient communities, resilient economies, resilient countries, which can deal with climate risk and climate change impacts. So these are two things that we need to keep it. So any action that you take in climate change would primarily fall in either of it. Of course, there are some actions which can fall in both the categories. So all these solutions are based on the concept of a triple bottom line. I think some of you might have heard, which is called people, planet, profit. Triple P, three P's, or triple bottom line. So this is where everything is based on. If you look at the solutions approaches, so that is very high level when we look at climate change mitigation and adaptation. When I break it down into different categories, so we can see the first one, phasing out of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas. So which is a primary reason for all the emissions. So that is when we started digging the coal and exploring the oil and burning it. So that is when it all started. So phasing out fossil fuel as an energy source, over next few decades is something very important, and a lot of discussions are going on that particular part. And uses of renewables, I think, as most of you are aware, solar energy, wind energy, hydro, small hydro energy, even for that matter, hydrogen. So there are a lot of new technologies also coming in renewable energy. So adopting renewable energy, promoting renewable energy is another solution that has almost zero or close to zero emissions. So green technologies, so which can be in a different industries and sectors. So maybe in manufacturing, maybe in transportation, and different spaces. So that is one thing which we need to look at. Electric mobility, the battery vehicles that we are talking about, is something that we all know. Curbing deforestation. Deforestation is also one of the major problems, because forests, or the trees for that matter, acts as carbon sinks because they absorb carbon dioxide. The problem accelerated because one side we have been emitting a lot, burning fossil fuels, and other side we are cutting down the trees, cutting down the forest. So the problem is accelerated because of both the things. At the same time, while curbing the deforestation, stopping the deforestation, we also need to reforest on the other side. So wherever the land availability, in fact, if you know, in our state, in many other states as well, reforestation drives have been on. So we have been planting millions of saplings each year, so that there will be more forest cover, more trees. That in fact, Hyderabad Outer Ring Road has bagged Green Award recently at International Forum for deforestation drive. So these are all the things that lead to climate change mitigation. Reducing meat consumption, more plant-based diet, curbing population growth. So these are all again lifestyle choices. But again, they have direct implication on the climate change mitigation. So nobody would force you to stop eating what you prefer to eat. But if you want to make a conscious choice of mitigating or contributing towards climate change mitigation, probably you can choose a different lifestyle. Why it is, like, we will talk again on the next slides. Carbon capture and storage technologies, which is CCS, is one important thing which has been in development and testing phase, where the technology helps capture the carbon from the atmosphere. It's kind of directly removing, it's like physically removing carbon from the atmosphere and storing it underground or under the ocean bed or somewhere, so that we are directly removing the carbon from the atmosphere. So that is one thing which is also there as an option. And if you break it down further, there are so many things. I don't want to discuss each and every one, everything, every item. But broadly, if you look at renewable energy, has all these options. So waste heat recovery. So these are primarily technologies that are adopted by the industries. So waste heat recovery is one. Waste management, which is a big issue, where we just dump the waste wherever we want, and unmanaged, unscientific landfills, which are causing methane emissions, nuisance, and a lot of issues. So which are also major contributor to the climate change emissions. So transportation is another, where we use a lot of diesel and petrol. So if you look at Delhi, it's only CNG related public transport. Though the decision was primarily because of the local pollution, but the shift is possible. So it is one example where entire public transportation can be shifted to something less polluting, less greenhouse intense fuel. Of course, the last but not the least, afforestation and reforestation projects, which act as carbon sequesters. So when you look at climate change adaptation, we talked about mitigation in the earlier two slides. So when we talk about climate change adaptation, if you look at this, graph, cost of climate change on the y-axis and global mean temperature on the x-axis. So you see, as we progress, as the temperature rises, the cost of climate change will go up because there's a lot of damage that is going to happen if we don't adapt at all. So the black arrow, which is on the extreme left on the top, this is how the costs are going to be. If we adapt, and so there will be some level of damage will always be there, but it will not be as bad as cost without adaptation. So it will be extremely high if we don't adapt. The blue line, which is blue arrow, which is almost at the bottom, is a cost of residual climate change damage, so which is anyway going to happen. So we are not going to escape from the residual climate change, which we already have set the ball rolling. So it is going to happen, but if we don't adapt to what is going to happen in the next 50 years, 100 years, then we are going to face a lot of issues. So with that, I'm done with all the technical related content of what it is, how the solutions, mitigations, etc. So now we look at global actions. So what is happening at global level? I'm sure most of you know about the Sustainable Development Goals. So the 17 goals, of which 13 is a climate action direct goal to fight the climate change related effects. So that is something we already have in global action. Not that rest of them are not connected, but 13 is a primary climate action related goal. So this is one, but at the same time, there are many things that are happening even before we have the SDGs in place in 2015. So the Kyoto Protocol was signed in 1998, which for the first time brought almost all the countries, excluding US and Australia at that point in time. So brought all of them onto a single platform and made to sign a pact to jointly work towards mitigation of the climate change, and which had led to further mechanisms which are called Clean Development Mechanism and Joint Implementation, which came into force in 2005, and their validity was till 2012. So those mechanisms have done a lot, but the next successive mechanism that is supposed to come in 2012, so which never happened at least till 2015. So the negotiations have happened from 2009, 2010 onwards, but nothing concrete came up. The main reason was the deep divide between the developed and developing countries, as I have been mentioning about the climate injustice that has been happening, where the historical emitters are mostly responsible for what has happened, whereas developing countries claiming that you already developed well and you should not stop us from developing like you, and it is our right to develop. And as a result, if you were developing now, of course there are a lot of technologies, but yet there will be more emissions. There will be in absolute sense the emissions will be emission will go up, continues to go up. Same case with underdeveloped countries. So they are still yet to explore the kind of lifestyle, the kind of access to different things that they have in developed countries. So that has been point of conflict for all these international negotiations for very long. So until we have Paris Climate Agreement, which happened in 2015. Finally, there was a ray of hope that countries have signed this climate agreement in 2015 in Paris. IPCC already warned that anything which is going beyond 2 degrees is going to be catastrophic. So Paris Climate Agreement has taken a call to try to reduce, try to keep the temperature in check by 2000, less than 1.5 degrees temperature rise by 2000. So that was primarily agreed and signed by all the countries. Then we have last year 2021 we have COP26. COP is nothing but Conference of Parties, where the countries, the country heads, leaders, scientists and policymakers across the globe come together and discuss on the course of action for climate change, for the future. So that has happened in last year, Glasgow, which has contributed to a lot of positive development in climate change mitigation efforts. And it has given a lot of positive momentum to the climate change actions. And in COP27, which happened in 2022, so further developments have happened, which we'll discuss in the next slide. So I will not show the video now, maybe towards the end. So Paris Climate Agreement, which came into signing ceremony, happened in 2016. So which is a kind of historic agreement. Countries have primarily agreed to reduce their emissions in this agreement. So which is a good positive development. But again, we need to also keep in mind it took almost 6 years, to come to this stage where the real actions have been, we are getting close to real actions, the funds and the mechanism, so which will come in place in the next 2 years. So it's a very long process, tedious process, because from initial agreements to the final mechanisms and actions, it takes at least 5 to 7 years. Even for the same thing happened for Kyoto Protocol, which was signed in 1998, whereas the actual mechanism came in place only in 2005, came into force. So at least this time we had that experience, but because of COVID, there was some hiccups. So still it's still in planning stage, but it's in advanced planning stage. So we are hopeful that next 1 to 2 years we'll have some clear mechanism that will come in place, and it will start working towards the goals. So this is what happened COP27 entrance in Egypt. One important thing that changed for the first time in COP27 is loss and damage. The compensation related concept has been accepted for the first time by the countries across the globe. So as we have been seeing the climate injustice thing, where the island and small countries and African countries who are not at all responsible for the climate change, but were impacted the most. So they need to be compensated because they are facing the issues, incurring the losses and damages because of somebody else's fault. So this COP27 that happened in November has primarily agreed to compensate for such losses in these countries, which is called loss and damage concept, which has been accepted. So there are modalities and how it will work and who is eligible, what kind of damage are compensated. So all of them needs to be worked out. But this is a big achievement for us to at least to get to this stage, get this thing accepted by the developed countries. So from the developments of Paris Agreement, then Glasgow last year, the race to zero is something which has gained momentum. So it's a UN-backed global campaign where the organizations, companies are trying to meet net zero emissions by 2030. And if any of you are active in LinkedIn, follow some of the big companies, corporate companies, most of them have come up with net zero targets by 2030, 2035, 2040. So there's a lot of positive development in that way. Corporates are taking action towards what is a positive climate development. Most of them, in fact, even in India, I have seen most of them, if not under Race to Zero related program, but still they have set the ball rolling for the climate actions, reducing their carbon intensity, trying to become net zero, climate positive, all of that. As of 2021, if you see the statistics, at least 21% of the largest public companies, have committed to meet the net zero target. So these companies are representing 14 trillion equivalent of business, so which is quite huge, which is very encouraging and positive development to look at. So this is something which is which has been a positive development post Glasgow. However, so if we have to keep the global warming in check, so we need to cut down our emissions by 45% by 2030 and net zero by 2050. So which is a very tight target, but with strong actions, we can meet these ambitious goals. But again, it's not just one person decision. So everyone has to come together and agree on the solutions and the kind of efforts that we need to put in to reach this kind of goals. If we look from the country's perspective, so there are different countries which have committed to net zero targets at different years. So India, has committed the longest, target year, which is 2070. Other countries such as China, Russia, so they have kept a carbon neutral target year by 2060. Similarly, if you see some of the European countries, I think Middle East, not Europe, Middle East 2053. So similarly, if you see all of them, there are few countries which is mentioned as achieved, which is Madagascar, I think Gabon. Basically, they have achieved in the sense they are underdeveloped, primarily underdeveloped, and their consumption itself is so low that they are automatically carbon neutral. So it is not that they have advanced lifestyle and they have enough resources and enough as much as consumption, energy consumption as US or Europe. So they need to go up the ladder in terms of the developments. But as of now, this is how they are, and if they continue to go in a sustainable way, then they'll continue to be carbon neutral. But if you see rest of them, almost all the industrial countries, even developing countries like China, India, most of the South Asian countries, American countries, so they have set a target because they are at a level when it comes to the kind of emissions that they have. So we'll see last but not the least, India's actions. So India has a national action plan for climate change released way back in 2007 or 8 around. India was party to Kyoto Protocol and Paris Climate Pact. So India has played a very proactive role in these discussions and negotiations. And at the same time, India has kept a renewable energy goal of 450 gigawatt by 2030. We also have a target of I think 175 gigawatt of renewable energy installed capacity by 2022. We are still short of achieving it. We also have to blame COVID and other issues that have cropped up in between. But still, so India has a very ambitious target of 450 gigawatt of renewable energy capacity by 2030. We also have domestic market mechanism such as the renewable energy certificates, energy efficiency certificates, which are being, which have been in place for some time, not performing to the extent we thought. So, but still, they are there in place as an actions. India is also just recently released a draft for domestic carbon markets. So, which we'll talk further the next slide. So, what is carbon market, climate investments, and carbon finance? And India has submitted its nationally determined contributions plan to NFCC in way back 2015 itself. And India is also, asking the corporates and big companies to report under business sustainability. So all these things are there, from India's point. We'll discuss further. India already committed to reduce its emission intensity by 33 to 35% compared to 2005 level by 2030. So all these are little technical in nature, but this is how they look like. India has come up with different guidelines, though some of them are directly related, some of them are not so directly related, but still they have something or the other to do with climate actions, either as a country or state or as corporates. The corporate governance, India has given voluntary guidelines of how to conduct a good business, which includes taking care of society as well as environmental responsibilities. There are national voluntary guidelines that are released in 2011 by IACA, Minister of Corporate Affairs, so which also has further strengthened how the company should behave, conduct their social and environmental economic responsibilities, which have 9 principles if you see on the right. So that is what it is. And then in 2012, so India has asked the top 100 BSE listed companies to report their business responsibility under BRR. And then we have in 2013, we have Companies Act, which has made the corporate social responsibility mandatory, which is not directly climate change, but which also has actions related to environment, which can indirectly contribute. And BRSR report, business responsibility sustainability reporting, which has come recently. This year, this financial year, it is voluntary for corporates who fall under that category to report. But from next year onwards, it is mandatory for them to report what are their social and environmental responsibilities, which will include their emissions and climate action, everything else. In fact, I read recently HDFC's top management, I think, if I'm not wrong, MD or CEO, someone was giving a message that so we need to create a data bank, information bank on the companies and their emissions in India. So they are looking at not only at different kind of risks related to social and financial economic aspects. Now they started looking at climate and carbon related risk of a company before lending them the financial support. So BRSR is also, in a way, it's a government mandated initiative, but it is not stopping there. If you look at ADB, IFC, World Bank, all these international financial institutes have their own reporting requirements and also the guidelines to follow when it comes to environment, climate change, carbon emissions, mitigation plans, everything. So companies especially have to be very cautious about how they deal with it. They are not at all taking action related to climate change and not thinking from climate risk and perspectives. So it is going to be problematic, in terms of dealing with their shareholders and stakeholders in future. So let's talk about our role as individuals in society, what we can do. The first and foremost thing, I think it is not a rocket science, climate friendly behavior comes to public transport, using public transport, which causes the least of the emissions. If not, carpooling is also a good option. I think a lot of our colleagues would do that. A lot of IT companies started doing it through apps, and there are also a lot of apps that we can changing eating habits, which is one of the options, depending on how comfortable one is. And also the water usage, not wasting water, is also something which is positively contributing. Use of energy efficient appliances. So we have now the star rating on each and every equipment that we buy. Using LED lights, I think most of us are now almost shifted to LED. So using such kind of energy efficiency, energy efficient appliances and instruments would contribute positively to the climate change mitigation efforts. Reducing unnecessary energy usage resources such as paper reduction, plastic reduction, all of them will also contribute. So every minute action at our individual level would also contribute to that goal. For organizations using renewable energy, of course, you need to have a little bit of investment. Energy efficiency, maybe you can do energy efficiency audits, adapt green technologies, which will optimize your resources if it is, a manufacturing industry or, a factory. Promoting sustainable practices, such as plantation drives. I think this plantation is something which even the colleges can do, even the industries, factories. So most of the organization can do. Harvesting water, recharging the groundwater, such kind of initiatives. Also, if the organization is someone who is a lender, who is an investor, so they can also look at climate friendly investments. You can create a independent portfolio of investments where you'll exclusively invest in projects or companies which are working towards positive climate benefits, or even when giving them loans or financial assistance, you can look at what is their climate change behavior, what is their perspective, and how are they going to act on their responsibilities related to climate. Also, estimating carbon footprint, and aiming to become carbon neutral or carbon positive is also something most of the companies are doing, most of the organizations are doing. So there's something called, you can manage what you measure. So unless we measure, we understand where we are in terms of what are our emissions, what is our carbon footprint. So you will never be able to, chalk out a plan towards mitigation efforts. So carbon footprint, estimating carbon footprint is the first step in this direction. If you understand how much you are damaging the environment, the climate, then you can plan your action accordingly. Creating climate related awareness to employees, public, on different kind of actions that they can take. Also different kind of sessions like the one we are doing today, which will give a lot of knowledge on why we need to care about climate change, what actions we can take. So such kind of sessions will also help in how we deal with it. At country level, so there is something called low carbon economy, low carbon transition, also they call it. So how, as a country, through different measures in energy sector, transport sector, maybe in food supply chains, agriculture. So how a country as a country, through policies and practices, they can shift towards low carbon economy. So that is when ultimately they'll become carbon neutral country, like which India has set a target of 2070 to become carbon neutral. So the policies, regulations that curb the pollutions and emissions is also something which they can think of. Using renewable energy, environmental friendly technologies, like we have metros, we have renewable solar power, all of them are coming up. We have better efficient lighting in place. So many things, small efforts, but they are going to add up. So if we look at almost all the street lights are now LED, even in small towns. So one is, it is good for the environment and climate. At the same time, it is also, easy on the pocket for the government. So such kind of policies, such kind of practices are also going to help in these efforts. Public awareness campaigns. In fact, it's a good thing that we started seeing climate awareness campaigns. People started talking about big platforms, what we need to do, how we can do Earth Hour, Environmental Day. So all those days we start talking about, what we can do as public, how we can, small actions can change, contribute towards this. So as I mentioned before, so these are some of the easy technique just to remember: using energy efficient appliances, switching off appliances on standby. Just don't leave it, just off them with remote. Rather, you just switch it off straight at the plug point. Turn off the lights when leaving the room. Beware of overheating your home in winter. Reduce internet use on your computer for unnecessary usage. Don't waste water. Start cycling. Use public transport and carpooling. Recycling waste and using fewer disposable product is something which also helps. Cutting down on paper, to the extent possible. Just use electronic forms than printing a paper unless it is really necessary. So in fact, even by reducing the font by one, so you'll also save almost 20-30% of papers that you use. So all these minor changes in our behaviors and patterns can also add up to the overall efforts. Changing the eating habits, as I mentioned, so depending on one's preferences. But one thing we need to keep in mind is there's a lot of impact with meat eating, because uh, they need to grow the animals, which are almost 10 to 100 times more resource intensive in terms of meat. So that is something which has a direct impact on climate change. So if you look at, to grow a chicken, to grow a goat or animal which is primarily grown for meat consumption, so in its entire lifetime it almost eats probably few thousand kgs of grains or even more. So whereas the same thing can feed you for almost 6 months or a year. So that is how the calculations are done. So if you eat directly plant-based diet food, so you are very light on the environment and on the climate. So that is something, maybe food for thought. Some of the people who would wish to do that. So as I mentioned, creating awareness, understanding on these aspects is something very important. So a lot of, at least not in India, India is just catching up on climate, but in Europe and other countries, other economies, advanced economies, a lot of public campaigns, public awareness is there. And if any one of you would have heard of Greta Thunberg, a teenage campaigner who rose to the fame of climate through her climate protests. So there's a lot of activism out there on climate change. So which also, which is also something good, which needs to also happen in India and other countries, so that the next generation will act more responsibly in terms of how they behave, how they use the resources. We also need to be having practices in place. We need to be prepared for disasters, climate-related disasters. The trainings and related sensitizations need to happen, both from government and civil society perspective. And a lot of climate action plans are being prepared by different city governments, state governments. So they also need to come into place, and we also need to do our part as citizens. And there are a lot of programs that are being implemented by international agencies in our cities, in our states, even in rural areas. So whatever contribution that we can do from our side, so we can do in those aspects. These are some of the organizations which are working in climate change area. Sorry, something happened. Yeah. Some of the organizations that are working in climate change, especially the primary organization, now it is called UN Climate Change, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is the primary organization, the most apex body related to climate change efforts across the globe. Then we have IPCC, which is a research body, which does all the research work across the globe and comes up with the recommendations to UN, UNFCCC, as well as to other decision makers, governments. So we have WRI, WCST, European, even World ADB, GRI. So many organizations, GHG protocol. So many organizations are in place who are doing their bit in fight against the climate change. When it comes to India, so we have Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, which was earlier MOEF. Now they made it MOEFCC, added climate change. We have NATCOM, NCDMA, TERI, NIDM. So all these organizations are working. There are a lot of NGOs, hundreds of NGOs who are working on climate change mitigation and adaptation related efforts. So this is about the action. At the same time, I would want to mention before we close, the investments. So ethical investment is something we also have a mention about in this topic. So climate change investments are there in terms of and ADB, World Bank kind of institutions and financial institutions also have exclusive funding for climate programs. So they have set aside billions of dollars for such programs. So there are different ways of deploying these funds. So one is they obviously are giving it to the corporate companies, but they expect those companies to have a clear action in terms of climate change mitigation efforts. So they are not willing to finance those companies who are still having age-old practices and detrimental practices towards climate change. Second, they're also having exclusive programs which will help the government policymakers to bring in such kind of practices and policies put in place so that the entire economy, entire public get benefited as a result of such intervention. So they support them with funding, with research, with specific programs, promotions. So that is one way. And thirdly, they also have direct investments which will generate carbon benefits, direct carbon benefits. So I would put it that way. So you might have heard about carbon credits somewhere. So some of the investments directly go into projects which actually reduce the carbon emissions. So such as it could be afforestation, reforestation drives, it could be efficient lighting programs, or it could be efficient cook stove programs. So there are so many programs that have the potential. Now we also have NBS, nature-based solution kind of programs, which also have very high carbon mitigation potential, which will contribute towards climate change mitigation efforts. So all these are happening simultaneously by different organizations. And we also have investors. I would call them either socially responsible investors or impact investors, who are also looking at investing only in those companies who have a positive climate and environmental benefits or positive impacts. So these are, in a way, I would call them very responsible investing, because they want to see that their investments are not causing any damage to the environment, climate, or the society, and they don't want to be the reason for such contributions. These are new breed of investors who are looking at such kind of companies, such kind of interventions and technologies, innovations to put their money in. So we just to mention, we at CQC as a social impact project developer. So we only invest to develop such projects which have benefits for the climate change mitigation as well as for the communities. And there are many organizations which have different ways and approaches working in climate change area, as well as benefiting communities or industries or governments. So all these are there, and we all together, if we put together all our hands and then join towards common action, I think then this gigantic problem of climate change, can be tackled with effectively. And I'm hoping all of you with this session have good amount of knowledge, and being faculty, I think you will further take this knowledge to thousands and lakhs of students who will act responsibly, during their course of action in their entire life journey. So I think I will stop here. Maybe we can open up for Q&A for next 10 minutes, and then we can conclude. So over to you, Anuradha or Pavitra.
Yeah. So thank you so much, sir, for such an informative and a wonderful session. The statistics that was quoted by you, sir, was amazing, and especially the implications of climate change that you have shown us. It was really quite alarming and awakening call for all of us, sir. And the actions that at global level, country level, and especially at the individual level that we should be taking, I think we should really think about all those things. So really, we are heartful thanks to you, sir, for delivering such a wonderful session for all of us. And now I keep this session open for the queries and the questions by the participants. So participants, you can just, Anuradha ma'am has shared a question. Ma'am is asking if you could share a few companies you think we should invest.
Okay, I'm not an investment advisor, but I think if you look at recently the Tatas and HCL, also Jindal Steel. So these kind of companies, at least I see that they are taking very committed actions towards climate change. So again, this is one aspect of investing. So you also need to look at their profitability and other risk apart from climate change related aspects. So I would not suggest exactly few, but maybe we need to encourage those who are actually taking such committed actions towards climate change.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else would like to put in some queries or ask some questions? You can type in the chat box. Anuradha ma'am, would you like to add anything to this, ma'am?
So my question had always been this, and I've been always perplexed. In the recent times, I've heard you on two occasions saying that the climate refugees and the climate injustice and the most affected are the poor. The rich are at solace, the privileged are not affected. So would it really matter? Because the poor are not the ones who will really pollute or bring about this kind of impact. The rich are the ones who are the maximum consumers. So this concept of driving it that the poor will be affected, the rich will not be affected, or of course, the rains have been, indiscriminately, ruined, entered into anybody's homes in Hyderabad during the bad monsoon that the monsoon that we had in recent times. It didn't spare anybody.
Yeah.
It didn't spare the rich, it didn't spare the poor. Of course, poor were really affected.
Yeah.
So probably this concept of saying that the rich will be unaffected, I have a feeling that they will never realize. The rich are the ones, I hardly see a percentage of them feel, it's not going to affect me. It's the poor, it won't really matter. My lifestyle will not change. I had seen many people talk so. They say, by me alone, the whole world cannot be affected. So I've heard many people talk so, really feel bad and regret for their feelings. So this is a platform where I wanted you also to reiterate what I said, that, the rich should not think that way. They will be affected in some time or the other. They will not be spared. Nature will not be all the time favoring them, right?
Yeah, nature is not favoring them. Probably money is favoring them.
Yes, money is
So,
favoring them. Agreed.
yeah.
Not all times. Not all times.
Not all time. So I absolutely agree. So it's all about self-awareness and how much knowledge they have, about what is happening around. So if someone, either rich or poor, is blind about what is happening around, what is going to be, maybe this generation for the next 10 years, 20, 30 years, it may not be that extreme. We may still survive, but what about generation after 50 years or 60 years? How much money you may have, but it can't bring you food, right? So you still have to cultivate it and get it. And so if the weather is not supporting you, if there is no monsoon, there is no water to cultivate crops and harvest, and what your money is going to do with it? So it is something which they can feel comfortable with. Like if it is too much of rains, they can afford to, some people can afford to stay homes. If it is too much of heat, they can switch on the ACs. But at the end of the day, the fundamental things, the basic needs, that won't change. So as biological beings, we need food, we need water, we need air. So just imagine the situation of Delhi. I have been reading Delhi's weather. I mean, the air situation condition is getting worse. Air quality index is going bad day by day. So it's one of the worst in the world. So how much rich you are, you still have to breathe the same air. So maybe now we have air purifiers, inside our homes, but when you step out, you still have the same air. So rich or poor. So certain things, are the common resources would remain common. If the country becomes hostile, if there is no food to eat, no water reaching your home, how much rich or poor you are, so everyone is equally impacted and affected. So that thing, that holistic awareness one needs to have. I think that is when they will realize that it is also my action that will contribute to such negativity. So then they will think of a conscious decisions in terms of how they adapt to a better lifestyle, less damaging lifestyle.
Yes, sir. Thank you for that. Hope everybody made a conscious note of and work in that direction. So it's individual's responsibility. Each one should assume and think that they are not for themselves, that they are to live, as you said, have to leave something for the generations to come, their own generations.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So on behalf of
anyone
all,
else would like to, I think you are able to unmute. Yes, ma'am, please go ahead. Looks like we have no questions, so please go ahead.
yes, ma'am. So on behalf of all the participants, sir, I express my sincere thanks for your very lively and very informative session that you had with us. Thank you so much, sir. And I thank also all the participants for joining in for today's session and hoping to receive the similar response for the coming 3 days also. So with this, we end today's session. So let's all join tomorrow sharp at 4:55 for the next session, the 4th day of the Faculty Development Program.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you for
sir.
the opportunity. So looking forward to maybe future sessions, and thanks for all of you joining and listening to me for the past 2 hours. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Small
Thank
just, addition, there was a faculty from IAMC, I guess, Padma Priya madam. She had texted in the chat that she is into research in some concept, I'm not sure, just me, on something related to sustainable report. She's asked, she's a scholar, research scholar, and has some extended questions being sustainable reporting by my research topic. How can I approach you? Sir, I've asked her to take the link on the screen that you have left. So she will be approaching you, I guess.
Yeah. So I'll be quite
Thank you.
interested, for any research or academic related, discussions or contribution. It also, helps me to expand my horizon and understand things more from your perspective. So you're welcome anytime to contact me and can discuss.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. So we shall close the session now. Rupa, you can end the session, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am.